Vivid verses.
The apartment on Cordell Street cost Owen Marsh more than he'd planned to spend, but the second bedroom doubled as an office, and the building had a parking garage, so he'd signed the lease without much deliberation. That was his way: identify the variables, assign them weight, decide. He'd been doing it since he was 19, when he'd left his hometown of Grover Falls, Ohio, with $1,100 and a community college transcript, and had rebuilt himself so methodically that the rebuilding itself had become invisible even to people who knew him well. He worked in municipal contract analysis for the city of Harwick, Tennessee, a mid-sized city that sat in the Cumberland Plateau's eastern shadow and had the particular quality of feeling both permanent and overlooked. Owen had been there 4 years. He knew the good grocery stores, the mechanic who didn't invent problems, the coffee shop, a place called Steadfast Roasters on Birch Avenue, where the Wi-Fi was reliable and the staff didn't hover. He had a reasonable life. He built it the same way he built everything else. He met Cara Finley at a birthday dinner for a mutual friend named Greg in the back room of a restaurant called the Millstone. It was January, cold and dry outside, and the birthday party was 12 people around 2 pushed-together tables, which was exactly the kind of social event Owen could tolerate. Small enough to be honest, large enough to retreat into. Cara was across the table and 2 seats down, laughing at something Greg's girlfriend Petra had said, and Owen noticed her the way he noticed most things worth noticing, quietly, without announcement. They talked during the lull between the main course and dessert. She worked in interior design at a firm called Alderton & Voss, lived in the Waverly Park neighborhood, had grown up in Chattanooga. She was specific about things she liked: good coffee, old furniture, honest people. She was quick, and her humor was dry enough that he had to stay attentive to catch it. He asked for her number before the check came. She gave it without hesitation. They dated through February and March with the cautious rhythm of 2 people who had each, at some previous point, made an expensive mistake. There were dinners at small restaurants, a Sunday afternoon at Harwick's Art Museum, 2 long walks along the river trail that ran behind the university campus. Owen paid attention during these months, not anxiously, but systematically, the same way he read a contract, looking for internal consistency. Cara seemed consistent. She was warm in private, composed in public, direct when she wanted something. She told him early that she didn't enjoy games, that she'd come out of a relationship 2 years ago that had left her tired of ambiguity, that she preferred things plainly spoken. Owen appreciated this. He told her the same about himself. By April, they were using the word together without awkwardness. He met her friends incrementally. Petra he already knew through Greg. Then he met Sasha, who worked in marketing and had a loud, generous laugh and opinions about everything: wine, traffic patterns, city council decisions. He met Cara's work colleague Britt, and Britt's husband Renner, who owned a landscaping company called Greenline and drove a truck that cost more than Owen's annual salary and apparently did not consider this remarkable. Renner was one of those men who wore success loosely, the way some people wear expensive watches, less as a display than as a baseline assumption. He was not unfriendly. He remembered names, asked follow-up questions from previous conversations, and had the easy confidence of someone who had never been seriously doubted. Owen noted him and moved on. He had no reason to think about Renner. The first dinner at Britt and Renner's house was in late April. Their house in the Lakemont subdivision was large and well-appointed. Pale oak floors, a kitchen island that could seat 6, artwork that had been chosen rather than accumulated. They had a 6-year-old daughter named Maisie who appeared briefly, was charming to all the adults, and was then disappeared to bed by a college-age babysitter. Owen brought a bottle of Carath Hill Cabernet. Renner already had something open, something from a small batch Sonoma winery that Owen had never heard of and which Renner mentioned once, only when asked, so there was no vanity in it. Still, The knowledge landed. Filed, Owen thought. Not important yet. Dinner was good. The conversation was easy. They stayed until nearly 11, and on the drive home, Kara said, "Renner is crazy attentive to Brit. Did you notice?" He topped her glass off 3 times before she even had to reach for the bottle. Owen had noticed. He'd also noticed that Renner had been telling a story about a job site in Nashville when it happened, and had tracked Brit's glass in his peripheral vision while maintaining a conversation with the entire table. It was a practiced kind of attentiveness, not absent, but automatic, installed over years. "I noticed," Owen said. Kara said nothing else, and they rode the rest of the way home, listening to the radio. He did not flag it then. In isolation, it was nothing. May arrived warm and humid. They went to a cookout at Sasha's apartment complex, which had a shared rooftop terrace. Maybe 15 people. Someone's colleague had recently gotten engaged, and the conversation kept orbiting the engagement, the proposal, the ring. The colleague's fiancé, a man named Porter, who sold commercial insurance and had apparently proposed at a waterfall in Costa Rica, was fielding gentle interrogations with the patience of someone who understood this was his one afternoon of being the most interesting person in the room. Later, walking down from the rooftop, Kara said, "Porter planned that trip just to propose. Months of planning. I think that's really romantic, don't you?" "Sure," Owen said, because it was. He did a real thing. It's just, I've always thought the gesture matters as much as the question. The effort behind it. Owen said, "The effort's evidence." Agreed. He thought, this is either general reflection or it has a direction. He watched for the direction. June introduced what Owen would later identify, looking back, as the first discernible pattern. They were at a dinner party at Greg and Petra's house. 6 people, good food, the kind of evening that ends with everyone sitting around a cleared table with half glasses of wine talking about nothing in particular. Greg mentioned that he'd been teaching himself to make pasta from scratch on Sunday afternoons. He demonstrated by pulling out his phone and showing a photo of tagliatelle drying on a rack. There was the expected admiration. Kara looked at Owen across the table. "You should try that," she said. It was light, offhand, and she moved on. Owen registered it. His Sunday afternoons were his research time. He used them to stay ahead on contract law changes, to read, to maintain the systems that kept the rest of his week functional. He had explained this to her. He had also explained that he cooked well within his chosen register, which did not include handmade pasta. One data point, he noted, nothing to build on. But in July, at a casual dinner with Sasha and her new boyfriend, a man named Cole, who worked in tech sales and had an easy, talk-to-anyone manner, Cole told a story about surprising Sasha at her office with lunch because she'd mentioned offhand the previous week that she was stressed about a presentation. He'd shown up with food from her favorite Thai place, Lotus and Lime, sat with her for 40 minutes, and left before she went back to work. The story was told without strategy. Cole was answering a direct question, and the story simply illustrated the answer. Owen had no objection to Cole. Cole was, by all available evidence, a decent person doing an ordinary kind thing. But that night, walking from the restaurant to Owen's car, Kara said, Cole remembered that from a week earlier. Just filed it away and acted on it. He did. Owen said, I think that's what attentiveness really looks like. You're so present in the moment, but he's carrying things forward. That's different. Owen was quiet for a half block. He said, Are you telling me I don't carry things forward? Kara said, I'm just making an observation. They didn't argue, but he noted the word just. He noted it because people who are just making observations rarely need to say so. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, Owen lay in the dark and ran the inventory methodically. The pasta comment. The thing about Porter's proposal. Now this. 3 remarks, each tethered to another man's behavior, each allowing Kara plausible deniability. I was just noticing, I was just saying. Individually, nothing. Together, a line that was beginning to have direction. He did not say anything. Not yet. He understood that prematurely naming a pattern was its own kind of mistake. You needed the fourth point to confirm the shape. The fourth point arrived at the end of July. Renner and Britt hosted another dinner. 4 couples this time, including Owen and Kara, Cole and Sasha, and 2 neighbors of Britt and Renner whom Owen had met once before and remembered reliably as Marcus. No, the excluded list he caught himself as Morris and his wife Diane. Morris worked in commercial real estate. Renner had recently expanded Green Line to include a second crew and a storage facility in Murfreesboro, and much of the early conversation was about the expansion, not in a boastful way, but the way people talk about work they're genuinely invested in. Renner had a contractor's approach to conversation. He laid things out in order, stated what he needed, moved through. At some point, the conversation landed on home improvement projects, and Renner mentioned he'd spent 2 weekends building raised garden beds for Britt because she'd mentioned wanting them 18 months ago, and he'd been carrying it as an intention until he'd had time to execute properly. 18 months, Petra said. And you just remembered? I kept it on the list, Renner said, as if this were unremarkable. Owen watched Kara's face from the corner of his eye. She was smiling at Britt in a way that he could read now without difficulty. It was not admiration of the garden beds. It was the filing of a contrast. Later, on the drive home, the garden beds are incredible. He built those entirely from scratch. I know, Owen said. He mentioned 18 months, Owen. He carried that for 18 months. I heard at the same table you did. Kara said, I'm not criticizing you. The fourth point, Owen thought. There's the shape. He said pleasantly good and said nothing else. August had the quality of held breath. Owen spent those weeks doing what he was best at, gathering information without appearing to gather it. He was good at going still, at occupying a space without claiming it, so that the people around him behaved as they would if no one careful were watching. He learned this at 23, working a contract audit job for a construction firm in Knoxville, and it had proved more useful than most of what he'd formally learned since. He was now certain that the comparisons were not accidental. They were patterned in delivery, always in the car, or at home, or in the low-lit aftermath of a social event, never in front of the subjects themselves. They were delivered with preemptive softeners. I'm just saying, I'm not criticizing, I was just noticing, which meant Kara was aware they would land as criticism and was hedging against accountability for the landing. And they were always triangulated, never a direct complaint about Owen, but always a man adjacent to Owen being used as the actual argument. He also noticed what wasn't happening. Kara was not asking him to change. She was not expressing a need and then waiting to see if he'd meet it. She was broadcasting a signal. I have measured you against better options, and you're wanting, and she was waiting for him to pick up the signal and do what exactly? Start making pasta? Start buying flowers spontaneously? Owen didn't know precisely what capitulation would look like, but he recognized the mechanism. Manufacture a sense of inadequacy, then wait for the inadequate person to try to earn their way back to baseline. He had seen this mechanism before in a different context. His second year in Harwick, a city council member had hired a competing analysis firm mid-project and had then briefed Owen's team with selectively incomplete information, creating a situation where Owen's deliverables looked insufficient compared to the other firms. Owen had identified the pattern inside 2 weeks, had quietly documented the information gap, had presented it in a meeting without heat or accusation, and had watched the mechanism unravel in real time. He knew how to wait, but he also understood, now, clearly, that what he and Kara had built over the preceding 8 months had a structural problem at its foundation, and that structural problems didn't resolve themselves. Labor Day weekend, there was a barbecue at Cole and Sasha's apartment. Small, 8 people outdoor space, late afternoon into evening. The conversation was easy and low stakes. Owen was comfortable. He was genuinely fond of these people, which was its own kind of useful knowledge. Toward the end of the evening, Cole's friend Bart showed up, a man who had apparently been at a separate party and was stopping in on his way home. Bart was around 35, owned a small independent bookshop called Crestwood and Company on the east side of Harwick, and carried the slightly distracted quality of someone whose interior life was louder than his exterior one. Owen liked him immediately, the way you sometimes like people who are not trying to be liked. Bart sat down, was handed a drink, and joined the tail end of a conversation about how people met their partners. He said that he'd taken his girlfriend, now his wife, on their first date to a recital at the Harwick Conservatory, not because he was particularly musical, but because she'd mentioned once in passing that she'd played violin in high school. He'd looked up the conservatory schedule and found something appropriate. Cole said, "Man, you're making everyone look bad." The table laughed. Owen smiled. He watched Kara absorb this. She turned to look at him, not with judgment, just with the look itself, the inventory look, and then turned back to the conversation. Owen thought, this is the moment. Not to say something, to decide. He had the information he needed. He had been patient enough that he wasn't acting from feeling, but from conclusion. He didn't want to be angry. He wasn't, particularly. What he felt was more like the sensation of finishing a long calculation and arriving at a number he'd half expected. Not surprise, not devastation, but a clean kind of recognition. He was not what Kara was looking for. That was real, and she had been telling him so, in the language of other people's husbands and boyfriends, for months. He would not chase the version of himself she appeared to be envisioning. He was a precise person, not a performing one. He spent the drive home quiet. So did she. September came with a coolness in the mornings that made the city feel more like itself. Owen did not act immediately. He did what he always did with important decisions. He gave himself 10 days of deliberate observation, operating exactly as he normally would, to confirm he wasn't constructing a narrative from selective data. He paid attention to what was good, too. The dinner's in, her particular way of sitting cross-legged on his couch while reading, the ease of Saturday mornings before the day accumulated its obligations. He did not discount any of it. He also noticed in those 10 days that the comparisons continued. Not dramatically. No single instance was a confrontation. But they were there, steady and architectural, like a waterline rising incrementally in a basement. Renner had remembered an offhand conversation about Britt's favorite wine from 8 months ago and had ordered a case of it as a surprise. He notices the details. Cole had taken a day off from work to drive Sasha to an appointment in Nashville because she'd seemed anxious. Without being asked, Bart's wife had mentioned, on an evening Kara had apparently spent with Sasha, that Bart kept a small notebook where he wrote down things she mentioned wanting to try or do, so he could plan things around them. He actually listens. Owen cataloged each one without comment. He allowed them to accumulate. And then, on a Thursday evening, 10 days in, Kara mentioned almost in passing. They were washing dishes together, the television off, the kind of domesticity that creates honesty in some people and evasion in others, that her ex-boyfriend, a man named Theo, who had apparently been her most significant previous relationship, had been, in her words, relentlessly romantic. He'd written her letters. He'd learned to make her favorite dessert from her grandmother's recipe, which she'd described to him once. He'd driven 4 hours to her parents' house to ask her father something, before they'd ever even discussed the topic. "I didn't value it the way I should have," she said. She was looking at the dish in her hands, not at Owen. "I think I took it for granted." Owen dried a glass. He said, "What happened to Theo?" "He married someone else." She paused. "Earlier this year." And there it is, Owen thought. Not Renner, not Cole, not Bart. Theo was the original measure, and the rest had been stand-ins. The comparisons hadn't been generated by the people around them. They'd been projected outward from a grief that Kara apparently hadn't finished processing when she'd started something new. He understood this. He did not find it monstrous. But he also recognized that his function in the narrative she was telling herself was not partner. It was shortcoming. He was the thing that fell short of a man she'd let go and then lost. He had been, without his knowledge or consent, enrolled as supporting evidence in a case she was building against herself. That was not something patience could fix. He dried the last glass. He put it in the cabinet. He said, "I appreciate you telling me that," and left it there. He spent the following week doing what he thought of as gathering his leverage, which was not, despite how it might have sounded, adversarial. It simply meant organizing what was real. He wrote nothing down. He needed no record. He ran the full inventory in his own mind, the way he ran contracts, laying out the terms as they had actually been established versus the terms as they appeared to be operating in practice. The terms as established, a relationship between two direct people who preferred things plainly spoken. The terms in practice, one person measuring the other against a private standard assembled from other men, a lost relationship, and an unspoken wish for a person who did not exist in the room. Owen made no grand announcement to himself. He simply understood that the conversation ahead was going to require him to be precise, and that precision, in this case, was a kindness to both of them. The occasion that prompted it was not dramatic, which was appropriate. It was a Saturday in mid-September. They'd had a relaxed morning, coffee, the newspaper, an hour of comfortable parallel occupation in the apartment. In the early afternoon, Kara brought up a dinner they'd been invited to at Britt and Renner's in 2 weeks. She was talking about it in an ordinary planning way when she mentioned, as an aside, that Renner had apparently already arranged a babysitter for Maisie weeks in advance, because Britt had mentioned she was tired and he wanted her to have a fully relaxed evening. "He just does these things," Kara said. "They become second nature to him. I wonder if you even notice those things." It was the mildest of the statements she'd made in 8 months, but it had the particular quality of being delivered without any of the usual softeners, which meant something had shifted. Either she'd grown comfortable enough to drop the hedge, or she'd grown frustrated enough that the hedge no longer felt worth the effort. Owen put down his coffee cup. He turned toward her fully. "I want to have an actual conversation," he said. "Not a difficult one, just an honest one." Kara looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify, somewhere between readiness and surprise. "Okay, I've been paying attention since around June," he said. "The pattern is someone in our group does something specific for their partner. You tell me about it on the drive home or later that evening, and the implication is that I don't do that thing or something like it. We've done this with Renner, Cole, Porter, Bart, and now Renner again." He said this evenly, the way he would outline a discrepancy in a contract. "Tonight you also added Theo." Kara was quiet. "I don't think you're doing it maliciously," Owen said. "I genuinely don't. I think you're telling me something you haven't figured out how to say directly. But I'd rather you just say it directly, so we can both deal with what's actually true." She was still holding her coffee cup. She set it down. "I don't think I've been unfair." "I'm not saying unfair," he said. "I'm saying indirect. There's a difference." A pause. The refrigerator hummed. "I do think," Kara said carefully, "that there are ways in which you could be more present, more thoughtful about small gestures." "Okay," Owen said. "What would that look like specifically?" She seemed slightly caught, as if the directness of the question required a type of specificity she hadn't prepared. "Just noticing, like Renner does, like Cole does." Owen said, "I notice things. I notice differently. When you were sick in March, I rescheduled a work meeting I'd been trying to set up for 6 weeks, so I could take you to the urgent care clinic and then go back to your apartment and stay until you felt stable. I didn't tell you about the rescheduled meeting because it wasn't relevant. I kept the milk stocked at your apartment for 3 weeks after that because you kept forgetting when you were run down, and I knew you'd need it. I don't announce these things, but I do them. Kara was looking at him. He could see her recalibrating. Those things are different, she said. They're practical. They're real. Owen said. The question is what we're actually measuring. Another silence. A longer one. Tell me about Theo, Owen said. Not unkindly. The shift in her face was small but complete. Not devastation. More like the collapse of a maintained posture. This has nothing to do with Theo, she said. I think it has a significant amount to do with Theo, Owen said. And I think you know that. He married someone else this year. You told me that 15 years' worth of romantic investment from him went to someone else, and now you're auditing every man in our social circle against a standard that is mostly assembled from things Theo used to do. He paused. I understand it. I'm not angry about it, but I need you to see it because it's the actual thing. She was quiet for a long time. The afternoon light had shifted. A car passed outside. I didn't realize I was doing that, she finally said. I think you half realized, Owen said. Not harshly, just accurately, which is different from not knowing. She absorbed this. He could see her preparing something. He didn't know what, a defense or an acknowledgement or something else entirely, and he let the space stay open and didn't fill it. After a long moment, she said, So, where does that leave us? That depends on you, Owen said. I'm not going to become a different person to win a comparison I didn't agree to participate in. I can't be Theo. I'm not Renner. I'm not Cole. I am a specific person who does things in a specific way, and some of what I do you haven't been seeing because you've been measuring it against a different instrument. That sounds like you're telling me to settle, Kara said. There was a slight edge in it. Owen did not rise to the edge. It sounds like I'm telling you to be honest about what you actually want. Those are different things. And what do you want? She asked. I want a relationship with the person I'm actually with, Owen said. Not a project to qualify myself against someone else's standard. That's the baseline. If that doesn't match what you want, then it's better to be clear about it. Kara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, out the window where the afternoon was finishing itself. I've been unfair, she said, quietly, without decoration. You've been working through something, Owen said. I understand the difference. But it's not. I'm not sure it's something I'm done working through. Owen picked up his coffee cup. I know, he said. They did not break up that afternoon. Owen had not gone into the conversation expecting any particular outcome, and he remained true to that. He had said what was real. He had been heard, and the rest was genuinely not in his control. He was at ease with that. But the following 2 weeks had the quality of aftermath. Not hostile, not anguished, but clarified in the way that things are clarified when the window has been opened and the sealed air has left the room. They were both careful with each other. Not falsely. Carefully in the sense of actually attending to what was in front of them rather than to any projected image. They went to dinner at Britt and Renner's. It was pleasant. Renner was his customary competent self, attentive to Britt, good with the table. Owen watched all of this without the sense of being measured against it, because he had named the instrument aloud and it had lost its power to operate in secret. What he noticed, instead, was something he hadn't made room to notice before. Kara watching Renner and Britt with an expression that was not contentment, not admiration, but something closer to longing. The particular longing of someone who has identified something they want, but are not sure it's available to them in the present configuration of their life. He didn't feel sorry for her. He felt something more careful than that, a recognition that she was a person working through a real problem, and that the real problem was not him. On the drive home, she was quiet. He turned on the radio low and drove. She said, around the time they reached the Waverly Park turnoff, I need to be honest with you. Okay, Owen said. I think I've been unfair for longer than I admitted. And I think the reason I've been unfair is that I'm still thinking about something I lost. And it's not. I don't think it's fair to you to keep doing that. Owen turned off the radio. He waited. I'm not ready for this, she said. I thought I was. I wanted to be, but I don't think I am. He nodded once. I'm sorry, she said. You don't need to be sorry, Owen said. You needed to know something, and now you know it. That's not a failure. She looked at him. You're not. You're not angry. No, he said. I feel like you should be angry. Why? Owen said. You're being honest. This is what honest sounds like. I'd rather have it than the other version. She was quiet. There was something in her expression that might have been the particular sadness of being treated well at the wrong moment. You're clearly looking for someone else, Owen said. His voice was even, without bitterness, without performance. I'm making that possible by leaving. The words sat in the car between them, not as a wound, as a fact plainly spoken. She didn't argue. She didn't cry, though her eyes went bright for a moment. She looked out the window at the Waverly Park Street signs. Okay, she said. Owen pulled up to her building. He put the car in park. Take care of yourself, he said. She got out. She stopped on the sidewalk, not at the door, just on the sidewalk, and turned back once as if she were going to say something additional. He waited, unhurried. She didn't say it. She went inside. 3 weeks later, Owen was at Steadfast Roasters on Birch Avenue on a Saturday morning, at the table in the back corner where the Wi-Fi was strongest and the foot traffic was lightest. He had a contract review due Monday and a cup of coffee going cold beside him in the low, productive quiet of a place where people work without disturbing each other. Greg texted around noon. Dinner at ours Friday? Just a few people. Owen typed back, yes. He would run into Kara eventually. Harwick was not a large city, and their social circle was what it was. He had no strategy prepared for this because no strategy was needed. He had not departed in anger or in injury. There was nothing to manage. He had made a decision with full information, plainly and without theatrics, and the decision had left him intact. This was the ordinary work of self-respect. Not one grand moment, but a series of smaller decisions, each one requiring him to know precisely who he was and to refuse to temporarily vacate that person in order to satisfy a comparison he hadn't agreed to enter. He looked at his work. He went back to it. The afternoon came in through the window in long October slats, the particular color of a year winding down. The coffee went cold. He ordered another. A couple came in and took the table near the door and talked in the comfortable voices of people who knew each other well. Owen didn't watch them. He had work in front of him, and he was good at it, and that was its own kind of thing. Not everything, but real and his, and not in need of comparison to anyone else's. He read to the end of the clause, made a note in the margin, and turned the page.
Thanks for listening.